In the case for the real Jesus, Lee, you talk about the 2006 announcement about this thing called the Gospel of Judas.
Right.
And I remember seeing that all over the TV. In fact, I remember the ticker at the bottom of one of the national news programs talking about how the Gospel of Judas contained materials that had been edited out of the Bible. You know, it was very
Somebody's
dramatic.
been reading the Da Vinci Code a little too much.
Yeah. Well, tell us about that, though, because you investigated this. What did you discover, and what do you tell us in your book about this so-called Gospel of Judas?
Well, Mark, as you know, there are a lot of people in our culture today who are claiming that there are alternative gospels to the four gospels in the New Testament that are equally legitimate and tell us about Jesus and shed new light on who he really is. Well, I investigated that for my book, The Case for the Real Jesus, and I went out and I interviewed Dr. Craig Evans. Well, Dr. Evans was a scholar who was on the National Geographic panel that actually translated the Gospel of Judas, this discovery that they made, this ancient manuscript, and is thoroughly knowledgeable about it. And I asked him the tough questions about this, and he pointed out a couple of very interesting things. He said, first of all, the Gospel of Judas was probably written, we know it was written, before about 180 A.D. Now remember, Jesus was put to death about 33 A.D., so we're talking into the 2nd century, quite a ways. We know this because Irenaeus, who was an early church father, talked about it. In his writings, he didn't say, wow, there's this Gospel of Judas floating around. It's got some really good information about it. He writes, he says, this is a, quote, fictitious history. Beware. Don't take this seriously.
And this was a church father that said that when?
This was in 180 A.D.
Wow.
So he's warning people and saying, hey, look, beware. This thing's floating around. It isn't legitimate. Don't take it seriously. So that tells us something from the beginning.
Tells us a lot.
Tells us a lot. Interestingly, too, the gospel is not called the Gospel of Judas. I'm sorry, I take that back. It's not called the Gospel according to Judas. It's called the Gospel of Judas. And so this may be a signal that this was not intended to represent the gospel according to Judas. It is rather a gospel of Judas, a gospel that talks about Judas. Now, what it really tells us, Mark, is nothing about the authentic Jesus and nothing really about the authentic Judas. It paints a new picture, and the new picture says that Judas was really the hero. He was really the greatest of all the disciples, and that he conspired with Jesus in order to betray him so that Jesus could be freed of his earthly body. These are Gnostic beliefs. Gnosticism is a belief system that grew up in the 2nd century that really is different from the authentic beliefs of Christians from the 1st century at the scene where Jesus and what Jesus taught. Now, the Cainites who wrote and were responsible for the Gospel of Judas had this weird Gnostic belief. It's really interesting. They believed that the God of this world was evil. Because look at all the evil in the world. He must have been a bad God. He must have been an evil God. So, if this God writes about some bad folks in the Bible, like Esau or the people of Sodom and so forth, they must really be good. Because he's a bad God. And if he thinks they're bad, they must really be good.
Was that where they get their name, Cainites, from Cain?
Exactly. C-A-I-N-I-T-E-S, Cainites. And so what they did is they said, well, Judas, he's a bad guy. He's the guy that betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver.
So he must be good.
He must be good. He must be a great guy. He must be the greatest of all disciples. And so what they do is they made up this gospel of Judas and propagated it. But as I said, even as early as 180 A.D., the word was out. And people said, hey, this has been written. It's not legitimate. It's a fictitious history. Don't trust it. And so, Mark, this idea that somehow the Gospel of Judas deserves to be in the Bible, it deserves to be given credibility equal to the other four Gospels, is just contrary to all of the historical data.